Welcome to the Rocket PD podcast. I'm your host, Corey Murray. I'm a longtime education journalist and co-founder of Rocket PD, here to bring you real talk with educators confronting what's broken in America's schools and hopefully offering up some advice and solutions about how to help fix it. Whether you're out to engage families, center students in their learning, or empower teachers and staff, we're going to cover the gamut, giving you ideas and frameworks that you can start using today. So what do you say? Are you ready to launch? Then let's get into it.
So I hate to start off an interview with a good friend like you, Corey, by saying you're asking the wrong question, but I think maybe it's not a question about the problems. I think it might be a question about the solutions.
Josh Starr is the managing partner of the Center for Model Schools, a division of mega publisher Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. He's also an author and a former school district superintendent. Since taking the helm at the Center for Model Schools, Josh has been on a mission of sorts to, as he says it, ensure that every student has the opportunity to attend the model school that they deserve.
The problems that we've had in public education have frankly been reasonably consistent for a long time, depending on the kind of era that we're in, whether it's getting kids to school, whether it's keeping them in school, whether it's engaging them in the kind of learning that will enable them to be prepared for their future.
In this episode of the Rocket PD podcast, Josh encourages school leaders to move from a problem mindset to a solution mindset and describes a framework for adaptive leadership that innovative leaders across the country have started adopting to tackle complex problems, be it chronic absenteeism, learning gaps, student mental health, or some other challenge, all by moving beyond the technical aspects of their work and asking an entirely different set of questions.
And I think we have to start asking ourselves, what do we need to unlearn about what we've been doing over the last 20 years to address the long-standing issues that we've always had in our public education systems.
Stick around until the end, when Josh describes a group that he's pulling together in the spring to model a 5-part framework for adaptive leadership in your schools. Hey Josh, great to have you. I know we're talking leadership today, and before we kind of get into it, I just wanted to talk about how leadership is changing, man. It's like, there are so many problems in schools right now that are so complex that maybe we weren't even worried about 10 and 15 years ago. I'm thinking about things like chronic absenteeism. I think I saw a stat up here recently where that was a 25%, and in some places has gone up to 65%. I'm seeing things like, how are we dealing with kids with disabilities and with special needs? I'm seeing things like, how are we dealing with learning gaps that are bigger than they've ever been historically? I mean, these are big, messy, complex problems. And I think when we talk about leadership, people say, gosh, sometimes the way we used to do things isn't working for the problems we have now. I just wanted to set the stage with that and kind of get your thoughts on leadership in general and the problems we're facing. And then we'll kind of dive into, what does that look like in our schools?
So I hate to start off an interview with a good friend like you, Corey, by saying you're asking the wrong question, but I think maybe it's not a question about the problems. I think it might be a question about the solutions. When you've been around as long as I have, you see pendulums swing, you see things come and go, you see, things being reframed and rephrased, and some things are really urgent, for a few years, and then they fall by the wayside. And the problems that we've had in public education have frankly been reasonably consistent for a long time, depending on the kind of era that we're in, whether it's getting kids to school, whether it's keeping them in school, whether it's engaging them in the kind of learning that will enable them to be prepared for their future and to be productive citizens. That's always been the issue. It's been measured in different ways. It's been articulated in different ways. I think the challenge is the times that we're in and the assumption that there are I guess the assumption is that things that we've been doing for the last 20 years in terms of leaders, the leadership skills are what we need to keep doing. And I think we have to start asking ourselves, what do we need to unlearn about
Yes.
what we've been doing over the last 20 years to address the longstanding issues that we've always had in our public education systems.
Now, I've heard, you've written some articles on this too, this notion of, sort of technical leadership versus what we're calling adaptive leadership, and sort of the difference in mindset that organizational leaders need to have when they're thinking about stepping up and confronting some of these challenges in perhaps a different way. Can you talk to me about those differences?
Yeah, so let's go back to what you said about absenteeism, right? I think that provides a perfect sort of window into the difference between technical versus adaptive leadership, which, and whenever we talk about the difference between technical and adaptive, it's never either or. It's always about both and. I like to say the technical leadership is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So we know that post-COVID, there's certainly been increased attention to the absentee crisis. We also know that prior to COVID, there were a whole bunch of kids that weren't showing up to school. We just didn't seem to care about them as much, which may be a conversation or a topic for a different conversation. So the technical piece is the incredible hard work it takes to get them back into school. Social workers, new ways of reaching out to parents, different ideas about how to make sure kids understand that, school is essential to them. But it really rests in the value proposition that kids see in attending school every day. If you can get everything online, which you can, which, my child, my youngest, who's about to be a junior in high school, all his stuff is posted online. So I asked him one day, well, why go to school? He goes, friends, girls, he likes it. He likes some of the class discussion in the few classes where they actually discuss things. He likes to be able to talk to the teacher, and obviously, his parents, me and my wife, are going to make him go to school. But what's the value proposition? What's the experience going to be like that's different than what I can get from just simply being able to look at all the information on my own? That's an essential adaptive question that requires teachers and administrators at the school and system level and families to say, here's why public school is so important for my child's future. Not just get them in the door, but keep them there by increasing the value proposition. That's a different kind of question and requires a different kind of leadership skills than just making sure that you have the essential resources, the necessary resources you need to get kids in the door.
Yeah, that's cool. So let's talk about organizing around this value proposition. If I'm a school leader and I want to move in this direction, what does that look like? I know you guys have talked about, a framework for creating space for adaptive leadership within organizations, but how is that fundamentally, the structure of that, how is that fundamentally different than what we're seeing in schools right now in terms of how we're set up? How do we kind of get set up and in the right frame of mind to think that way?
Well, so think about it in terms of what we know and what we don't know. And I'm not going to get Rumsfeldian on you, but there's what we know, there's what we know we don't know, and then there's what we don't know we don't know. So for the last generation, really, since No Child Left Behind, and we're still very much in that era, the focus has been on what we know. Standardized test scores. And it's something that's the value proposition. Get enough kids to pass the state tests and all will be well in schools, even though that there's an underlining sort of element, there's some dissatisfaction. Like it's not good enough, but right. It's like, okay, let's get, and sometimes that manifests itself in going from, an A or from an F to an A on a state report card grading system, or being able to say, hey, we've got our test scores up. And that's, everybody knew that and could kind of organize around it, even though it's dissatisfying to many families and certainly inadequate for many teachers who want to go much deeper. But the technical work of of aligning your actions as a school and as a school system towards that goal are reasonably straightforward. Here's how many kids didn't pass this section of the test. I do my item analysis. I did right, and I go from there. And that's necessary. I get it. No problem. But people want something more out of school. And how do you engage your families, particularly if you're in a very diverse community, to help them understand, or for you as a leader to understand what they want? Maybe not everybody actually wants to go to college or can afford to go to college. How do you help them see other options? Maybe a child has certain interests in a certain area, or maybe the local economy demands certain skills. How do you engage your families in saying, yeah, this is what makes this school a great place that I can see my child in, because they'll be able to achieve their goals and their dreams and be set up to be successful in the future. Maybe your teachers have some really great ideas in how to organize the day so that kids are going beyond what's just required in the test. How do you engage them to activate their ideas and inspire them to actually work a little harder in some ways to do those sorts of things? That's a adaptive leadership skill set that requires one to go beyond the, well, X percentage of my fourth graders didn't do well in this section of the test, so now I'm going to bring in Y intervention, and boom, all my problems will be solved. You got to have interventions, you got to have supports, you got to have curriculum, you got to have data. But if we really want to rethink the value proposition of schools, it requires us to bring people together in collaborative engagement opportunities where they're really wrestling with the big ideas about why are we doing school and what does it take to get there.
Yeah, so these are like, it sounds to me like one of the things, it's like, when you talk about, we do X to get Y, it's like you have some things that have known solutions, right? You've been down this road before, and if you apply a certain process or technical way of thinking, you should be able to reach a solution. And then it sounds like there are these things that are big and different and new, and maybe they don't have known solutions. So you need to think about, where do I need to go to understand the challenges people are facing, maybe the blind spots that I have as a leader. Talk to me a little bit about this idea of gathering feedback from parents, from community members. I mean,
Sure.
is this like an active surveys? Is it something else? How do you get that feedback?
Well, so one thing is, as I mentioned earlier, that we have to unlearn certain things. System leaders, principals as well, school and system leaders need to understand that there are more smart people outside of your organization than inside your organization. And it can be, obviously just the numbers will tell you that much, right? But this question of expertise, where does it lie, right? So everyone may be able to agree on the shared values that one has around all kids graduating with more options than when they came in, right? Kids being prepared to embrace an increasingly complex world in their own terms. But a school superintendent, a CAO, a principal may not fully know the talent that exists within their system that can, amongst their teachers or even amongst their professional staff, or certainly amongst their parents, that can help them achieve that. That's where shared values come in. So that's where you want to spend a lot of time. And there are processes, this is where the adaptive work requires a lot of adherence to process and these questions of how do you engage people in a school community, in a school district around shared values, so if I only have meetings at the central office, only some people are going to show up. Do you have where they are meetings? Right, where you're going out and things like that. Things like, simple things like translation services, food, child, those are basic things that people do with community engagement. But the idea is that I'm going to go to you, I'm going to go to my families and really understand what it is that you value most about being in our community and what you want to see for your kids. I'm going to go to the teachers. I'm going to engage them in conversation about how do you really want to teach science? How do you really want to teach math? What are what can we all agree on that are evidence-based practices? And then how do we get people to every school to make, to organize around those? That requires going out to people, having very strict protocols, very clear processes for that kind of engagement. But getting to really know people and what they value, that's what's going to get them to buy into the vision.
That's really cool, because I think sometimes that gets overlooked, right? It's not just that you're asking for feedback. It's where are you going to ask for that feedback? How are you supporting people to make sure that they're able to get there and provide that feedback for you? And then really, what types of questions are you asking?
Yep.
Because the questions, I think, it sounds like really matter.
The questions really matter. And it also, one aspect of this, I'm thinking about the work that I did in Stanford in detracking. And there would be some people there, wealthy white people, who say, well, Starr never listened to us. And I said, no, actually I did. I just rejected what you were saying because it was only about privileging your few kids, whereas we had a whole bunch of other kids who were saying something totally different. Other families were saying wanted something totally different. So part of going out to the community, and that means your internal communities too, is enabling yourself as a leader to separate the wheat from the chaff. Unfortunately, some of the most vocal people are the most unreasonable. Most people are silent but reasonable. Yeah. Most people just want, a safe school for their kids. They want a safe place to work. They want their kid to be engaged. They want to feel happy as an employee. They want to see the results of what's happening in school to translate into future success. And if you give them a reasonable explanation for what you're doing and why you're doing it, they're pretty much going to be okay with it. Even if they don't agree all the time, they'll at least say, okay, it's got some integrity in the process. The most vocal people tend to be the ones that show up at the school board meetings, that write letters to the editor, that are the citizen watchdogs and are on Facebook and all of that. By getting out into the community, both, again, by community, I mean internal and external, you're building support for your vision. As a leader, it gets people to understand why you're doing what you're doing. What's your story? What's your narrative? What's the collective narrative that you want to create? And that serves, frankly, a political purpose as much as a practical one.
Yeah. Now, you've been a leader of some pretty large school systems. I know at the Center for Model Schools, this is a lot of the work that you guys do in working with districts to be innovative, to launch change-based initiatives. You've collected all this feedback. You've asked these questions. You've thought through it. You've organized your information. How do you go about launching a big initiative that is going to hopefully move the needle relative to some of these challenges?
So one thing that I say to leaders all the time, and I say to my team all the time, and myself, is slow down the inquiry to speed up the action. We tend to try to do everything at once in schools and in organizations. I have been guilty of it myself, and I sometimes don't take my own advice. And it's hard to not want to just do stuff and act. My kids are failing, X percentage of kids are failing this part of the test. Boom, do something, buy this, do that. It's sometimes a political reality. Your board demands it. Your community demands it. But the most effective leaders that I've seen are ones that can create some coherence and some alignment amongst all of the various parts of their system, whether it's from purchasing decisions to transportation decisions to personnel decisions to curriculum decisions to the placement of people. And you can always tie it back into, here is why we do what we do, our core values. Here's what we believe. And here is what we expect is going to happen as a result of me placing this principal in this school or me changing this bus route or whatever. And people can say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. It's grounded in what the leader said we were going to do, why they're doing what they're doing, why the budget looks a certain way, et cetera. It is a huge challenge for folks to slow down, but I'm also working with some leaders now who have realized, oh, shucks, we've been trying to do everything. And all of it's evidence-based. It's an evidence-based program we bought, an evidence-based practice. but we didn't really think about what it would take to change adult actions. And unfortunately, Corey, and this sounds a little counterintuitive, a little weird, all of our focus has been on student results, which, of course, as someone who's been deeply immersed in equity work and believes that student results are the ultimate outcome that we need to be focused on relentlessly with a very high standard, we've not been focused enough on the leading indicators of change in adult behavior that lead to the lagging indicator of student achievement. The more we focus on those expected changes in adult behaviors, the more likely we are to get the resultant student outcomes that we want to see, but we've not been attending to them enough. And part of the work which we're doing at the center now is focusing people on those adult actions in a coherent and aligned way.
So interesting. It's like in your head, you're thinking it's evidence-based. I'm supposed to be able to apply this and it's supposed to be able to work. But that's a very technical mindset, right? And I think what we're talking about is, again, slowing down, taking a step back, maybe giving people context, because it's those underlying things that change adult behavior. But what happens? Let's say you do that, right? You do that. I mean, you've got people leaning in. You feel like people really understand what they're supposed to do. And as you go along and you're making this change in your district to address chronic absenteeism, and you've applied all this data and all this feedback, you've got people leaning in, but it's still doesn't work. Does that happen? And like, how do you monitor and assess what's going on so you can pivot?
So when I'm a triple threat, right? I worked in public school systems for a long time. I was in nonprofit for a while, and now I'm in business. And one of the things that I learned in the nonprofit and the business world is about MVPs and being really sort of brutally honest with your data and not just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping that the results come out okay and when you get the state results in July or when kids walk across the stage, but having minimal viable products. So saying, okay, we always talk in school systems about piloting. Nobody ever pilots anything. Maybe they stagger their implementation, which makes sense, but nobody really pilots.
So true.
But when you do an MVP, you say, hey, let me put this out there. Let me try it. Let's see what works. And then you have these rapid iterative cycles that we're actually teaching people how to do now. To say, okay, if I want PLCs in all my schools, right? I want to make sure that, because PLCs are an evidence-based practice that improves instruction. Well, let's break that down. Okay, first of all, do I have the right teacher leaders? Okay, if I can't get the right teacher leaders, what do I need to deal with? A union contract? Is a stipend? How am I doing that? So if I break it down first into bite-sized chunks and say, well, what do I need to do to get to this ultimate outcome where people are more engaged through PLCs and their practice is improved? I'm not going to know that until the end of the year, maybe midway through the year. But there are things I know in September that will get me on that path. So you reduce your likelihood of significant failure when you have these rapid iterative cycles. Say, oh, wait a second, we couldn't find the right teacher leaders for our PLCs. What did we do wrong? Right, let's go back. And instead of it taking a quarter or a semester, you know that within a week or two. Right. So that's where we have to break things down into bite-sized chunks, in these rapid iterative cycles, to mitigate against the potential failure, but also to say honestly, hey, if we didn't succeed, let's break it down and understand what worked, what didn't. I don't think we do that so well in public education, although I do think we're getting better. And that's one of the things we're trying to teach people these days.
I love this agile mindset. I think that I agree with you. It's not something that happens often in public education, largely because of the way we've done things, over years, right? It's just been compounded over years in our brains to work a certain way. And, in order to step back and think differently, that takes a little bit of intentionality from our leadership and from our organizations, and maybe stepping outside of, what we've traditionally done and possibly facing some criticism and some questions as a result of that. So how do you deal with the questions, right? People are going to be asking, why are you doing this differently? Maybe I'm not on board with this because I don't like change. Like, how do you face the resistance to get to where you're going?
So one is to listen to resistance. Sometimes your most important information comes from the resistors, and sometimes the resistors become your best advocates. Two is, I think leaders have a hard time not being honest about what they don't know, and not staying in their, when I say staying in their lane, like I always try to encourage leaders to ask the question, what's the work that only I can do? And not I personally, but this position. What is this, because some people try to do other people's work. I think that being able to articulate a clear and bold strategy, but clear and bold vision with a strategy to back it up is essential. And to be able to tell a story around that. I think a lot of leaders don't know how to tell a story about why they're doing what they're doing. Everyone says, what's your why? And people are like, well, my kids. Okay, kids are your why. But there's a story behind why you do what you do, what you want, and what you want others to do in service of this larger vision. And being able to tell your story actually brings people in to your sort of circle to do the work. I think that resistors sometimes should have a place at the table, quite frankly. Yeah. Not if they're throwing stones, not if they're just seeking to destroy. You got to play by the rules. But I do think that there might be some people who have some different views. Education is so complex. There's no way that a superintendent, an assistant super, or even a principal can see everything that's going on within their ecosystem. You have to have other people who are helping you see what you can't. And that's where culture becomes the essential glue. Because if you don't have a culture where people can tell you the truth, then you're just going to keep moving along and say, oh, everything's great. And then it's going to come back and bite you in the ass. And you will be run out of town when it could be preventable by having a culture where people will tell you honestly what you need to know, whether you want to hear it or not.
Yeah, it's not always a natural thing, I think, to let dissenters in, to kind of open that table wider and to be able to use criticism and just really a different perspectives, more so than criticism, as a tool to help us get better, because we want to kind of do the things that we have in our head. We want to kind of listen to the people who echo kind of what we're saying because we believe in that. But when we can spread our view wider, we start to see things maybe a little bit differently. And I know that that's a big, that's written into a lot of leadership books that we've read around business. I think it's starting to make a lot of sense in the school context. But let's say I've got a great story, right? I've got a great story. I've got a good MVP. We've run this thing through. We feel good about it. But now you said, nobody pilots anymore, right? And the reason nobody pilots anymore is because pilots always flame out and it never gets to scale. So how do you take this thing to scale? You've got an MVP. You know that it's not going to look, maybe 6 months down the road, it's not going to look like it does right now. But you know that you have some good data points, you have some stuff to work with, and you want to grow it. How do you make that happen?
So I think it depends on what it is that you want to bring to scale. So I think that programs are not really scalable, but practices are. But programs can be scalable, and sure, everyone adopts this reading program, everyone adopts this social emotional learning program, everyone adopts this schedule, right? And okay, that's I guess that's scalable, but I think there are practices that are scalable. So let's take health and wellness as an example, and maybe this isn't a good one, but let's try. It should be a non-negotiable, right? Let's say it's a non-negotiable that everyone is healthy and well, right? Then lives a healthy life. Well, some of us may be runners, some of us may be weightlifters, some of us may swim, practice yoga, whatever it may be. Some people may be on a vegan diet, some people no carb, whatever it is. But there's certain elements of living a healthy and balanced life. Not everybody is going to do the same thing in the way they approach it, right? And the measure of one's success should not simply be how much you weigh every quarter, because then you can take a diet pill, right? I can starve myself and lose it, and that's not healthy. But if the measure is do I get up? Do I have the discipline? Do I get up every day? You see where I'm going, right? So those practices are scalable, and if Corey is doing yoga and Josh is a swimmer, well, that's fine as long as you're doing something to move every day. And I think we seek to scale programs, and we don't think about what are those evidence-based practices that adults need to be engaged in at all levels, and how do we also inspire them and encourage them and support them to make it their own.
Yeah.
Because that's what motivates people to do their best work.
Ownership.
Yeah.
That's a really cool thought. This notion of, I think so often, and this gets back to the roots of technical leadership, but people are being used, particularly in large organizations, of being told what to do and then executing on that thing. And I think what we're saying is, let's gather feedback. Let's bring people to the table. Let's open our view wider and start to give people, in a lot of ways within our organizations, that ownership, that context. Yeah. And then you start to see the ability of that entire organization to change in ways that maybe it couldn't before. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I like to think about one way I think about every sort of meeting of adults that I start, I always think, what's the experience I want them to have? And then at the end of a meeting, when we're talking about a decision, and it's clear maybe my decision, I always try to say to people, excuse me, what's wrong with this idea? Right? Tell me what's wrong with the idea. Maybe nothing's wrong. Great. Josh, you're brilliant and you solved all our problems. Or maybe you didn't think of X, Y, or Z. But that's where leaders have to be very willing to stress test their ideas and say to people, okay, let's take a look at what's wrong. This is where SWOT analyses comes in. And there's processes for this, so that leaders can make sure that the road they're going down is going to be the right one that's going to serve kids.
That's interesting because I think, there's all sorts of stats out there, whether you're urban superintendent, suburban superintendent, but the reality is the average superintendent in this country is not very long, right? And so if you're the one at the top that's directing this whole thing, chances are you're not going to be there in a couple of years. So if somebody below you and the team below you is not picking this thing up and running with it, given how long it takes for things to happen in schools, it's probably not going to happen. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, look, we always say there's the weebies, right? People that, you get in there and say, we've been here a lot longer than you have, and we'll be here a lot longer after you're gone. And part of it also is the sort of sacred trust you have with your community as a public servant to make it better for the next generation. That's the work. And the unfortunate part of it is the position of the superintendent in particular is not oriented around collective leadership, even though collective leadership skills collective leadership are the skills that are most likely to enable a superintendent to be successful. But that's not the orientation of the job and the expectations of the job. And there's a dynamic, among school boards, amongst the political class and parents as well as and even teachers and principals, that the superintendent should somehow be the smartest or know the most or be the best. And that's not necessarily the way good leadership works. And it's another thing we have to counter.
I had an opportunity recently to come to your conference, the Center for Model Schools conference in Orlando. I got to see all of these educators excited and gay. I hadn't been to a big conference in a long time, probably since COVID. And I was excited to go, and I was even more excited when I left. But feeling that energy and this idea of people coming together, making change, wanting to be a part of it, I think that we kind of hear all of these headlines about education. People are down on education. People are leaving the profession. But then you go to something like that and you see all of these people and you realize that every one of those people wants to be there regardless of all of these headlines and these challenges and these problems. Like, they're committed. And that is a super cool thing. If I am a school leader and I believe in this thing, I want to create more space for people. Well, actually, let me back up. Let me ask you, because you've been there, right? You were a superintendent for a long time. You've been a school leader for a long time. If you had to tell your younger self, right, like one thing about, what should I do to make sure that I'm in a position to help these people so that they can feel that enthusiasm, right? Like, what would it be?
Well, one thing on the conference, I got to go there. You gave me the softball to talk about. What I love about the ethos of the Model Schools Conference is we don't sell anything. We don't have any exhibitors, right, or no sponsors or anything like that. It's all about educators learning from and with other educators and their team about how to reach the standard that we've set around what a model school is. And people want to learn from others and they want to learn from practitioners. And the fact that we've created the space to do that in this joyous, fun way that recognizes and acknowledges, hey, you may not go to sessions all day, so here's a space for you to have some team time. That recognizes people need mental health breaks and they need to have fun, and that they want to see real practitioners doing the work. I just could not be more proud of my team that does that, because it really is an awesome experience. I think there's two pieces of advice that I'd have. One I stuck to well, and one I did not do well enough until I got older. What I've stuck to really well is knowing the hill you're going to die on. Know your core. Don't be afraid to get fired. Be sure to get fired over the right things. Yeah. And know the hill you're going to die on and what your core is and why you do the work. If you don't know why you do the work, then you're going to do a disservice to the kids, because the leader needs to have a strong core, and be an oak tree in some ways, right? Not sure. A willow, right? You're not bending. That has never been a problem for me. And in fact, that's the flip side of the other piece of advice, which I wish I had followed, which is around what I said earlier, the collective leadership. I'm really proud of the work that I've done in my career. I've been around for a long time. I wish I had focused more on culture and developing really strong teams later. I thought when I was younger, I became a superintendent at 35. I was young. It was the reform era. It was just go and do it. You got to break a lot of eggs, right? Yep. And look, I always tell leaders, you got to know, are you Moses or are you Joshua? Because it's two different leadership styles. Yep. And I was not aware enough of the need to really understand and leverage other people's strengths as much as I learned that lesson a little too late in some ways. And I wish I had known that sooner rather than later. And part of that's just experience, right? Because until you're in the leadership job, you don't necessarily know. And I wish I'd focused more on collaboration and collective leadership when I was younger, and learning some mistakes, I think, helped me as I got older, got more experience. But, know your core and make sure that you are empowering others and building a really strong culture. I think is essential. I
just wrote that down, right? Don't be afraid to get fired and know your core. Let me ask you this. Let's say I do this stuff, right? I commit to it. You guys have been working with districts for a while. This adaptive leadership piece is ongoing with a lot of your model schools districts right now. How are you seeing the mood in districts changing as people start to change their way of thinking and their mindset? What's the feeling like in those communities? I know you're traveling around and you're seeing this happening, so I'd love for you to describe it for some folks here.
So I think it's hard. I think for a couple reasons. One is that there are some people that want the technical work. They just want to know, tell me what to buy. Tell me the thing. Tell me the book to read. And I'm like, well, sure, read my book. That'll solve all your problems, right? Shameless plug, of course. I wish it were that easy. And look, we've moved away from, just focusing on the rigor relevance relationship rubric, which we were always known for. We've rebranded. We've sort of moved from this idea that, your problems will be solved if you just focus on this, to say it's a lot more broader and deeper. And some people don't want that. They don't. And part of that is it's really scary if you've been a leader for a long time and you've been doing things in a certain way, to say, oh man, maybe I'm missing something. Yeah. Maybe I was wrong. That's hard. It's a lot easier to say, nope, let's just try the next thing. right? Let's go on to the next program, the next rubric, the next protocol, the next book, whatever. So that's one. I've also found that people love the work that we're doing with them once they understand that it is a little different than what they've gotten before. And, let's go back to the health and wellness analogy, right? I tell my people, we're personal trainers, right? We're going to craft something that works for you, not something that everybody else can do. Obviously, you take the evidence-based practices. There's only one way to really do a squat. Well, there's different ways to do a squat, but you get my point, right? Don't run with your arms flailing, but you got to figure out how to take those evidence-based practices and make it work. It's going to look very different in Louisiana than it is in Maryland, than it is in California. And that's okay. And every leader's at a different stage, and that's okay. So when people, and particularly because leaders are so pressed for time, they feel so compelled to do something for kids tomorrow or today, they feel the sense of urgency. They don't want to hear, let's slow it down. Let's take a hard look at what you're really trying to achieve here. Maybe we're not the best partner for you because that's okay. I'm perfectly fine with that, right? That's harder than people give me the solution now. I want to know it. But folks are recognizing that, particularly in the last few years, and now with the political divisiveness that exists, the need for coherence and alignment, the need to focus on the main thing is more important now than ever. The need to have a new value proposition is more important than ever. And that by working with us, if they're willing to do the work, I'll stop. Growing up in New York in the 70s and the 80s, there was the old Sims, which is a discount clothing store. And their line was, our best consumer is an educated customer.
I know,
and
Sims.
I feel the same way about our work. Sims, right?
Yeah.
This idea that you're getting a really good deal by going to Sims, right? And so I feel the same way about our work at the center. The best, an educated consumer is our best customer because it wants to know, this is the real deal. This isn't just some BS, right? Follow the 10 steps, blah, blah, blah. No, this is the real deal. It's going to help me improve my practice. And that's what's going to help kids in the long run.
That's cool. So, and speaking of that real deal, I know you guys are offering something, this spring for people who might be thinking about that shift from technical to adaptive leadership. How do I go about doing this? Even starting to move my organization in the right direction? Maybe, we're not ready to jump both feet into this thing. We're trying to understand it a little bit more before we do that. What does that look like? Can you tell me a little bit about this thing that's coming up in case people want to join and bring their teams?
Yeah, we are thrilled, of course, to partner with you and the team at Rocket PD, Corey, on getting these ideas out into the world. And our 5-part, series, our course is going to not only give people the sort of theoretical frameworks they need to understand the approach, but also some really practical things they can test out in their schools. They can do tomorrow, right? Things that we can try, different ways of approaching the work as a leader, because it's really focused on your leadership skills. Not on here's what everybody needs to do in classrooms, which is essential, but what do I need to do as a leader to get people to embrace that work, to be highly engaged while doing that work, to have it comport with the meaning that they make out of their everyday experience. So it is taking those ideas and putting them into practice in these constant iterative cycles. That's what people can expect, so they can come out with a deeper understanding of why they should be operating in a different frame, but also how to do it with some real practical skill sets and examples.
Cool. So I know that'll be a great thing for some school leaders and obviously their teams to come and do if they're thinking about how to make this shift and change this mindset in their schools. Guys, that's 5 sessions. It's all over Zoom. Really easy to join. If you're listening to this on your podcast channels, you can check out the details at rocketpd.com. If you are watching this on YouTube. I'll drop the links down below so you can check those out there. Hey, Josh, I just wanted to say thank you. It's been great getting to know you. It's been great getting to talk to you here today. I'm sure, we'll talk again really soon, but I'm excited for this conversation that we're going to continue to have on adaptive leadership as we look to help school districts, solve some of these tough challenges and these tough problems that they're facing. It's going to be an interesting, but I think a very exciting school year. And I'm just really pumped that we get a chance to keep talking about this stuff. So thank you so much.
Me too, man. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you as always, Corey. So thank you.
Cool. You got it. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Rocket PD podcast. I'm your host, Corey Murray. We hope you found today's conversation insightful. If you enjoyed what you heard, consider clicking that like button and subscribing to our channel. You can download the Rocket PD podcast wherever you find your favorite pods. We're also on YouTube. Just search for Rocket PD. At Rocket PD, we're on a mission to empower the world's teachers and staff. To learn more about our work and the community we're building together, visit us anytime at rocketpd.com. If you're an educator and you're listening to this, remember, your work matters. So be well, do right, and let's keep up the fight.